Yes.
our first step.
Thank you, Chris. And I just want to make a comment. There are this nominal versus real return, and the fact that the returns that we are going to be looking at in this presentation are what the way you state it is include inflation. I know Chris does that as well. Maybe all engineers do that, but I always think of it, what we call nominal, as not deducting the impact of inflation, versus real rates of return are what does that dollar really buy after you take inflation into consideration. And so we are talking nominal tonight, but when we're talking millions, it's a good idea to check the real rate of return. And the good thing is with Craig's calculator here, it will do that with just a flick of the wrist. And the first one we're going to talk about here, it is so obvious, this difference between adding another million or not. We're talking about making the decision whether to save or to spend. And so, Craig, how are you going to quantify that and make it worth $1 million? All
right. So you have to save so that you have something to work with, right? So the recommendation in the book is that you save a little bit every month over a 40-year period, and at an 8% return rate, after 40 years, you will try to reach $300,000. And so you'll see how important this $300,000 is in a moment. But once you reach that $300,000, over the subsequent 30 years of your distribution phase, that $300,000 will grow into at least another $1 million. So I'll jump into the calculator and show you for this first step how saving a little bit each month can get you to that $300,000, and then I'll show you how the subsequent 30 years it plays out for large distributions.
Great.
Okay, so I've gone back and shared my screen, and I'm going to reset refresh the browser window, which resets the calculator, and we'll make it full screen. I listen to all the podcasts. I don't necessarily watch the videos, so I'm trying to to make it entertaining for listeners as well. So we're going to start with our baseline scenario. Most of them are going to be in the S&P 500. So the strategy I've chosen is S&P 500. And I'm going to start and display the 100% stocks allocation, so 0% bonds. Our first sequence year is 1970. We're going to show a 45-year duration with a $0 starting value, okay, and 40 years of $5,000 contributions that are not scaled with inflation, okay? So I just got to toggle this last one. And so, oh, forgive me, not $5,000. I'm not there yet. I'm gonna start with 0 actually. Okay. So the idea here is that someone who's 20 years old can save for 45 years. Okay. And if they save $300 a year, so the contribution amount is $300 for 40 years, over a 45-year period from, oh, that's 40 years, 45-year period, so they turn 65. Over a 45-year period from 1970 to 2014, they reach $328,000. So in total, they've saved, just over, I guess, $13,500 over those 45 years. That's all that they've outlaid. And they've reached $328,000 in this 100% stock portfolio for the S&P 500. So that, we found our $300,000. And by the way, $300 per month, per year is only $25 a month, right? So in this case, if you're in for such a long time, $25 a month socked away into a S&P 500 kind of index fund would allow us to reach that $1 million goal over the full 70-year period. So at age 65, they have 328,000. Now I'm going to simulate the distribution. So I have to add another 30 years. Okay. So I'm going to go a 75-year duration instead of a 45-year duration. They're still only contributing up to year 45. And we're going to pull out. We're going to start distributing in year 46. And we're going to distribute for 30 years at a 4% distribution rate. And we're going to use the flexible distribution, which is effectively pulling 4% of the portfolio's value out at that time. Okay. So over the subsequent 30 years, our ending balance at after 75 years of investment is $2.6 million. And we've pulled out of that just over $1 million to live off of. So this shows that reaching that $300,000, in this case, $328,000 threshold, in the subsequent 30 years, you can pull money out and have multiple millions of dollars if you stop investing at that time. Paul, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it? So here's a question I have, Craig. I mean, people are looking at these numbers and thinking, if I get to 300,000, that is going to turn into $1 million in either distributions or money that I leave to my heirs. And it looks like it's a lot more than just $1 million here as we look at this. But there is one thing we have to remember. We are talking about this relatively small amount of money that's been invested, all going into equities over a 45-year period, is it we're talking about here?
That's right. Well, the entire thing is 100% stocks in the S&P 500.
Yes.
Yep.
Now, people may think, oh, well, it must have been a special period of time. That's where the books are being cooked in that this was a period that the returns were abnormally high. In fact, they were almost 1% lower than the average 40-year return of the S&P 500. So in a way, what you see here is normal. Now you might say, well, I'm not going to have all my money in equities. Well, maybe you won't have. I'm 78 and I only have half. We only have half of our money in equities, but the equities are still the equities and they're still doing their thing up or down. But if you look at this early money, it would not be abnormal for somebody to put this money away and say, this is going to be an equity position until I retire. That is not an abnormal thing. Doesn't mean they have something else going on that's more conservative elsewhere. But our question here is this save versus spend. And boy, it looks like it is an easy, if we want to call another $1 million a home run, and all it takes is that $300,000 at retirement.
Right. And so I'll make it even better. I jumped straight into distributions, but what if you didn't distribute and you just let it ride for the subsequent 30 years? So 75 years of growth in 100% stocks in the S&P 500, right? That bottom number, of course, we've looped back from, once we hit 2020, we looped back to 1970, but we're kind of showing you could reach $8 million just by investing at 13,500 over that 45-year period.
It is the magic of compounding. It is still hard to believe, but it works. All right. Do we need to go on to number 2?
Absolutely.
Or we'll never get to bed. Number 2 is to save and invest early rather than later. So show us how that can be worth another $1 million.
Great. So we're going to stay with the same screen. I haven't changed anything here. And what we showed was a 20-year-old investing $300 for 45 years, right? What would happen if a 30-year-old saved $300 per year for 35 years, right? And so what I'll do is I'll adjust here. The contribution duration is actually going to be 35 because that's how long they're contributing. And the first year is going to be year 10, right? So we missed, somebody didn't start saving at age 20, they started saving at age 30, right? So, and I'm going to actually go back to a 45 year so that I can get rid of the extra tail at the bottom. So if you only save $300 and you start at age 30, you have, sorry, I want to start at year 11, right? Okay, so the bottom, you would only have $109,000 instead of $328,000 like we showed for a 25-year-old. So if you want to hit that $300,000, you need to save more every year. And I did the math in the background, and you need to save about $900 per month to reach $328,000 if you start at age 31.
Now, say that again. You have to save how much a month?
I'm sorry, not per month, $900 per year. Forgive me.
Okay.
Yep. I need to note that the book talks about months and the calculator does it annually. Right. So I sometimes get confused.
No problem.
Right. So, but it's $900 a year, or about $75 per month. It would be what you have to save to reach that same dollar value.
So then when you look at that 10 years of that you start out behind, it also, there's some other forces that start to come to impact the value. For example, you might be very aggressive in those very early years in terms of the equities. It might not just be the S&P 500. It might be small cap value. There are a lot of things that a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old they might do it differently, which would also slow the process down for that person who starts later. So it is, and now, where's the $1 million? Where do I actually see the $1 million? What you're telling me is that there's going to be, instead of 300 and some thousand, there's going to be, oh, I see. You're saying you're going to have to put a whole bunch more money in. That's the point you're going to make.
That's
here,
right.
Rather than, okay.
Yes, so you have to put 3 times. So that lost decade means that you have to put 3 times the amount in. Yep. And so this 35-year investment at $900 per year is $31,500 as opposed to $13,500.
Got it.
So time and market is critical.
Yes, absolutely.
Even for very small amounts of money. And of course, you know, Paul's spoken so much about investing for young children, right? Over that 75-year period or 70-year period, you know, you're talking multiple millions of dollars for these very small amounts of money.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the $1 million decisions, you call them steps, Rich calls them ways, I call them decisions, but they're all the same thing. The other thing about that 20-year-old, if they go to work, you work at a firm where they match a significant amount of what you put in. If you miss those first 10 years of matches, there's another possible $1 million decision right there. But that's not on the list, so we're not going to spend any more time on that. But I can move along here, I guess, then.
Yep.
And this is the big one. This is the granddaddy. This is stocks versus bonds. And why is that the granddaddy?
So as you know, and I'm going to, it's incredible repeating a mentor's words in front of the mentor. But your stocks are your gas and your bonds are your brake, right? Actually, Paul, I should just let you say this again. What's the difference between investing in stocks and bonds?